appreciate the work that he has done, and Senator Harkin, and the work Senator Reid's been working on this issue for months and months and months. And I'm still amazed that the Senate just refuses time and again, and the House refuses to do the right thing on this. This started back in 2007. It was bipartisan. President Bush with a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate. The presiding officer was involved, Senator Reid, others. We passed it. We did a 5-year freeze of interest rates, and now the bipartisanship seems to have gone. And repeatedly, this body has either failed to step up or actually voted no, and voted wrong in some cases to move forward on this. And as Senator Reid hears, I have tens of thousands of people. I say 380,000 Ohioans are now in the Stafford subsidized loan program. It will mean about $1,000, as it will in Rhode Island, per student if we fail to act by July 1st per year. And I've been to 4 campuses just in the last month or so at Community College in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County Community College at University of Cincinnati, and the other end of the state, Wright State University in Dayton, and Ohio State University in Columbus. All students. One was head of the young Republicans on one of the campuses. Others are Democrats. Most are just students trying to find a way to pay their bills. They're working class kids, they're middle class kids, they're poor kids, they're kids that really want to find a way to get ahead. And we hear the same stories over and over, but let me just share one that on my website, people have signed up and just come to my website and told us their story. And I'll just share one of those. And I know Senator Reid has been hearing from people in Providence and Warwick and all over his state also. This comes from Dorothy in Mount Sterling, Ohio. She's a special ed teacher, and she said, I never thought student loans would, she wants to be a special ed teacher. I never thought student loans would have such a huge impact in my life. I'm studying to be a special ed teacher. I want to make a difference so that our youngest generations have an equal opportunity to succeed in life. I rely on student loans to pay for my education and to assist me in times of need in this harsh economic climate. Higher interest rates mean I'll never be able to afford a home or a reliable vehicle. I'll never be able to provide for my family. I'll always feel in debt for trying to make myself a better person, trying to be a better citizen for our country and for the state of Ohio. If given the chance for better job opportunity outside of my area of expertise, I'd surely take into great consideration. I know that in years to come, I'll desperately be looking to relieve myself from the cost of my education. I feel like I've been punished for wanting an education, wanting to better myself so that I can better the lives of others. I want to make a difference. I'm fighting against those who don't even realize what it means to truly struggle. Please don't stop fighting for me. You can hear the desperation here. You can hear the focus she has on community service and public service, but you can also hear the view that she's being undercut by decisions we're making or not making here. She also, Dorothy also said something else that's pretty interesting. When we saddle these young people with loans, the average 4-year graduate in Ohio who's in a student who has debt has about $27,000 in debt. And you know what that means? If we pile more on Dorothy or in somebody in Rhode Island or in Vermont, it means they're less likely to buy a house, less likely to start a business, less likely to start a family. That's just morally wrong that we are standing in their way or making that harder. But think what it does to the economy, too. I want people like her to get an education without huge debt, to buy a home, to begin to provide and prosper and lift up lift the whole community in her as a productive worker and somebody who cares about the community. We have no business taking this away from people like her and adding to her debt. And that's why we've got to do this by July 1st. If I could yield back to the senator from Rhode Island.
Tremendous leader on this issue because he sort of leads from the front. He's in Ohio. He's talking to students. He's talking to families. He understands the personal ramifications of this. And, let there be no mistake. This is a program that benefits middle and lower middle income Americans. 60% of the dependent students who qualifies for subsidized loans come from families with incomes of less than $60,000. This is not a perk for the super wealthy. 70% of the independent students, that's the term of art for those adults or older people who may have some previous training, but they've got to go back to the community college to get a certificate. They're trying to transition from a job that was shipped overseas to one that they think they can get here. 70% of independent students, their incomes are less than $30,000 a year. So you're talking about people who cannot afford a doubling of interest rates. But there's another issue here, too. It's not just, as Senator Brown pointed out, to fulfill the legitimate, in fact, admirable personal ambitions of establishing yourself in the community, buying a home, raising a family. This is about our future, our productivity as a nation, our ability to compete in an incredibly difficult international global economy. We've looked at the statistics, and universities like Georgetown, their Center for Education and Workforce, said 60% of the jobs by 2018, a few years from now, will require some post-secondary education, 60%. But in 2010, only 38%, roughly, of working adults had a 2-year or 4-year degree. So we've got this gap, a 20% gap between the skills we need through post-secondary education and the skills we have. And we hear it, again, not just in analytical papers that are done by think tanks. We hear it every time we go back to either Ohio or Rhode Island, because employers come up to us and say, I've got jobs to fill. I can't find people with the skills, the training that I need to give them the job. I'd be happy to.
You know, Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island is one of the few graduates of West Point in this body, and served his country in so many ways, and still does. But I think about Jack Reed when I think about what happened with the GI Bill after World War II. You know, we want to help individual people with keeping these interest rates from doubling. But we know when we help lots of individual people, we help society as a whole. After World War II, literally millions of young men and women returned from fighting for our country, came back to the United States. The government was far-sighted enough in 1944 with President Roosevelt to sign the GI Bill, preparing for this huge wash of young men and women coming back from the war, what we're going to do. And we as a nation were smart enough back 65, 70 years ago, to help millions of those young men and women one at a time by helping them with their education. But you know what else it did? Those millions of students that benefited from the GI Bill gave so much to society. The prosperity, perhaps our best times economically as a nation, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, came out of the GI Bill, because we gave, when government helps in partnership to give opportunity to thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people, it also helps the country as a whole. And that's really part of our philosophy of public service in many ways. So what these Stafford loans, these subsidized loans do, as do Pell Grants, and, you know, we're seeing efforts to cut Pell Grants by the House of Representatives too, which is just the stupidest thing ever in my mind, but I don't understand the way some of them think. But when we provide opportunities with Pell Grants or Stafford loans, it's helping people like Dorothy, it's helping people individually in Rhode Island and Vermont, but it's also helping every community. It's helping Mansfield and Toledo and Youngstown and Cleveland and Garfield Heights. And I just think it's one of those things that there's just no real, it's just hard to understand why we wouldn't do this quickly. And I wanted to ask Senator Reed, if I could. He explained on the Senate floor one day how, you know, Republicans have said, okay, they're for this now. They don't want to double the interest rate, although I'm not sure of that from some of their activities. But you've talked about the way we're going to pay for this versus the way they want to pay for this. And I know you talked about closing some tax loopholes. They talked about sort of playing off a college student against a woman needing a mammogram. I mean, cutting health care. But you'd explain that to our colleagues.
I'd be happy to reclaim my time, Senator Brown. First, let me echo what you've said about you know, this is about being competitive, and when you talk about the Pell Grants, I have to reference my colleague and predecessor, Claiborne Pell, because he seized on that lesson in 1965 of the GI Bill and said, well, let's extend it broadly to college students. So Pell Grants, Stafford loans, all of those vehicles were created. And frankly, that I think is not only the reason we've led the world in innovation and creativity, but it's the reason why America, as well as, and probably better than any other society in the world, was able to proliferate computers and technology, et cetera, because we had a literate, well-educated citizenry who first could invent these devices and then could use them profitably. And we're in danger, if we don't continue to support education, to lose our innovative edge and lose our capacity as a people to adopt innovation and technology and continue to lead. So for all these reasons, our economic future is linked to assuming that, to continuing to support higher education. There's another point before I sort of talk about the way we propose to pay for this, is that there's been some on the other side says, well, you know, the problem is tuitions are just going out of sight and we're contributing to those tuitions. Well, in the course of this program, the maximum borrowing is $23,000. So this is not the driving force. And colleges do have to recognize they have to rein in costs. But this is not the driving force. This is the way so many families are able to make it through college and make it in to the economy and move up the economic ladder. But what our colleagues have said, oh, we're all for preventing this doubling. Of course, yesterday they voted consistently, with very few exceptions, to double the interest on Stafford loans. So what you say and what you do sometimes are different. But then they said, well, the real dispute is how we pay for it. We want to pay for it by going after money in the prevention fund. This was part of health care reform. But this prevention fund is absolutely critical. One, as Senator Brown indicated, people need diagnostic tests. They need to be able to go to a medical facility and get advice, assistance, a test, so that they can avoid problems. That's not only sensible for the individual, that's the only way we're going to get a handle on the proliferation of costs in the healthcare sector. One of the ironies of our current healthcare system, pending the, we hope, implementation of the Affordable Care Act, is that we have millions and millions of Americans who have no real access to health care, no access to preventive care now, no access to simple things like cheap pharmaceuticals to control cholesterol until they get to be 65 years old, and then they go into the doctor's office and they have Medicare, but their problems are so much more expensive. I was speaking to ophthalmologists in my office, and they said, you're absolutely right. We see people who come in for the first time really with health care under Medicare that have serious problems, adult onset diabetes, glaucoma problems. If we had seen these individuals 10 years ago, or a physician had, through a prescription or through other very inexpensive therapies, we could have avoided all these tremendous costs. That's what they're going after. And oh, by the way, that is, to me, that's another middle-class program, basically. Because, you know, frankly, you know, if you are well off and well situated financially, you will get all the preventive care you need. It's those people who are struggling in the middle class and moving into the middle class that need this prevention fund. Now, what we have proposed, not to attack another benefit, we hope, or smart, wise, cost-effective approach to health care that would benefit middle-income Americans, we're going after a tax dodge, plain and simple. A tax dodge that has been called by the Government Accountability Office something that has been used to avoid over $23 billion in wage and taxes on wages in 2003 and 2004. A huge gulf. In 2005, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration called this loophole a multi-billion-dollar employment tax shelter. Let me tell you how it works, is that you're an individual, a professional, a lawyer, accountant, consultant, lobbyist, and your skills are what you do as a lawyer, et cetera, the personal skills. But instead of being paid by your employer directly, you substitute a subchapter S corporation. So you are now an employee of the corporation. So you take as minimal a salary, if you will, from the corporation. But then at the end of the year, the corporation gives you the surplus as a dividend, which is taxed much cheaper. And so you avoid payroll taxes. It's legal, but it is a tax dodge. It's a loophole. This is so egregious a loophole that conservative columnist Bob Novak called it out. Sean Hannity on Fox called it out. The Wall Street Journal called it out, saying it's a simple way to avoid paying payroll tax, Medicare taxes, as well as other employment taxes. Now, closing this loophole is sound policy. We should do this anyway. But when we do it in conjunction with this student lending, we actually are able to help struggling families and close an egregious loophole. Now, what some of our opponents have suggested, oh, no, this is just another tax increase. We've been very, very careful. We restrict these to professional endeavors. We also restrict the impact to those making over $200,000 a year. So this is not targeted at the mom and pop stores. This is not targeted at the local laundry or the local dry goods store or the local hardware store who's organized as Subchapter S. In fact, PolitiFact, one of the agencies that do independent analysis of various claims, came and clearly rejected this characterization as a tax increase on the mom and pop stores and the small business companies and the job generators as false. So we have not only a sensible but a compelling way to pay for this. So if everyone agrees we can't let this happen on July 1st, we have an egregious loophole that should be closed anyway to pay for it. I suggest we move on. Just procedurally, let's bring this to a vote. If they want to put up the prevention fund for a vote, if they want to put up any other means to pay for it, fine. Let us have our vote, and let us avoid the doubling of student interest rates by July 1st. But I know the senator from Ohio has some comments.
Thank you, and I appreciate that explanation, because this is a tax loophole that almost anybody that's fair-minded about this sees is a giveaway to they've called it the Newt Gingrich, John Edwards to be bipartisan tax loophole, that each of them benefited tens of thousands of dollars. Again, they didn't cheat, they didn't break the law, they just took advantage of a tax loophole that I would think everybody here would want to close, because most people play it straight. They run, their income is their income, they pay the Medicare tax on it. This is a case where they don't, and I thought, believed in some fairness and taxation. But back to the individual people who will benefit from this, and that's why Senator Reid's involved. That's why the presiding officer, Senator Sanders, I know, cares about this. And let me just share in closing one last letter. This came from Courtney in Galloway, Ohio. I, like many other students, always had a college savings account. I remember putting birthday and holiday money in it every year. I always assumed it would pay my way through college. Before I even made it to high school, my grandmother fell gravely ill. My family had no other choice but to use my college savings to pay for her hospital bills and eventually to pay for her funeral. Since then, paying for college has been my own responsibility. All the loans are in my name. It's a burden that is constantly hanging over my head. I'm less than a year from graduating, likely with honors from Ohio State, with a degree in social work. But instead of being excited and looking toward my future, I'm constantly worried about my loan debt and the possibility of rising interest rates. And I could interrupt the letter for a second. Think about that. I mean, she's about to graduate. She wants to serve the country. She wants to serve her community. She clearly grew up with the right values, putting money aside, not spending things she wanted to do, I'm sure, when she was mowing lawns or babysitting or whatever she did in her teens, putting it aside, then spending it on her grandmother's medical expenses. And now she's worried upon graduation, a wonderful moment in her life. She's anxious about what this all means. And the life of a social worker, she isn't going to make a lot of money, obviously. And that's what she wants to do, yet she's going to be facing these bills for years to come. Said, I know that as a future social worker, I won't be making as much money as people in other professions, but helping others is where my heart lies. Unfortunately, I may be limited in the positions I can take if my interest rates increase. I may even be unable to work within the populations I'm truly interested in helping, veterans, homeless, senior citizens, if the pay would render me unable to pay off my student loans. I'm passionate about my education. I hold no grudges for what needed to be done, but the threat of rising student loan interest rates has affected me in a serious way. I feel as though it's something that I have no control over, which is a very heartbreaking feeling. I mean, she may not be able to pursue the public service she wants to do as a social worker because her debt load is so heavy. And how dare people in this body make a decision by inaction or make a decision by doing nothing to heap more burden, put more debt on Courtney's shoulders. How dare they, and how shameful it is that we simply can't get bipartisan agreement we had 5 years ago with President Bush to move forward in this, close a tax loophole to pay for it. Don't put Courtney up against somebody that needs an immunization or a breast cancer screening or a prostate cancer screening. Close the tax loopholes, move forward in this, take the anxiety off of Courtney as much as we can and others, and do the right thing. I yield